Welcome and thanks for joining me on Talk the Walk. I'm Sarah Wong. Last week, an unprecedented fifth term of the Legislative Council commenced after the government postponed the September legislative election for 1 year, citing concerns over the worsening coronavirus outbreak. The pan-democratic camp has since swung into action to vie for control of the legislature's 18 panels against their pro-establishment rivals. How will the pan-democrats maneuver the uphill battle in the legislature, and is Hong Kong's system of checks and balances under threat? With those questions in mind, we turn to Democratic Party legislator Ted Hui. Hi, Mr. Hui. It's great to have you with us.
Hello, Sarah.
Yeah, you sounds like you've been keeping busy these days. You've made our news broadcast a lot this week.
Yes, because LegCo resumes and all the controversial topics comes back. So it's been a busy week.
Great. Let me start with this. So 3 of your pan-democratic colleagues stepped down: Eddie Chu, Tanya Chan, and Raymond Chan. Actually, Ray Chan and Eddie Chu stepped down even before the pan-democratic the survey you guys did to show that narrowly to show support for you guys to stay. Why did you stay?
We stayed because I think just out of tactics, it's still valuable and it's still useful for us to be in council. Because otherwise, other controversial topics like the reclamation of land title, like allowing voting in mainland China, these are important topics, and it's worth having our voices and also different opinions and to be spoken out in the council. I think we just can't let it pass in minutes or seconds without any opposition. I think we need to voice out. That's why.
We'll get to the mainland. Hong Kong people in the mainland were given the right to vote just a second. So it's I would describe as an eventful start of the Legislative Council fifth term. So during last Thursday's election for chairman of the development panel, you were reported to the police after allegedly snatching votes from a ballot box, and a day later you were removed after you accused pro-Beijing lawmaker Junius Ho of calling for a vote too early. Would you say that stalling tactics are the primary strategy of you and the pan-democrats in the extended LegCo session?
Well, I won't say that's tactic. I mean, being removed and they call the police, I think it only shows how intense the situation is in a polarized, highly polarized situation, adversarial situation in LegCo. And I would think that it's not really a big deal. It's usual struggle or fight and arguments that we have in council. But nowadays, with the newly elected national security law, the establishment will be making use of it, will be threatening us that if we don't be a good boy, then you'll be caught by the police and we can put you to jail. I think the message is quite clear. But of course, it doesn't mean that we should surrender. We should still protest in the council, and as a minority, even we are outnumbered, but at least that's something that we should be doing, filibustering for evil laws, and also to speak till the last moment, and that's something we should do.
So what are you and your colleague trying to achieve by doing what you do?
I want the public to see that it's our will that we will fight till the end. We are not surrendering even we are outnumbered. And we are continuing the spirit of the movement last year that we really struggled to voice out, even we are the weaker side. So at least I want the establishment and the government to feel that we are still there to speak for the people.
So how would you respond to criticism that the pan-democrats are wasting taxpayers' money and playing pokers with the pro-Beijing camp while the livelihood issues remain deadlocked in LegCo? How would you respond to that?
I think it's the government itself and the four establishments that's putting a deadlock here. The deadlock is that the council itself doesn't represent the people. It only represents the elite and only represents Beijing's interests. So without a fair and open mechanism of solving problems and controversies, and I think we're meant to be like that, meant to be arguing on politics forever. So we've been asking for universal suffrage. We've been asking to eliminate the small circle functional constituencies so that we can really go back to people's livelihood issues. But of course, that's been denied. And of course, last year, the government introduced the anti-extradition law. That's so controversial and triggered all the movement last year. And I think it's really the responsibility of the government and Beijing that we are not talking about people's livelihood issues.
Would you say like you only resort to filibustering to solve this deadlock within the pan-democratic camp? Is that the only strategy you guys have up your sleeve?
Not the only one. Filibustering is a small part of it. But of course, when we are faced with evil laws and when we are faced with unfair laws that infringe our human rights, and to question the government very deeply and to reveal piece by piece what are the defects and what are the drawbacks of each piece of legislation. And that's also an important part. Of course, when it comes to voting, when the President Leshko forced progressing without even letting us the chance to speak, we will struggle physically. And we want to create that tension. That I think that's an important message and important spirit, and that explains why we're staying in council, because we will give them a really tough time when they don't listen to us, and when our basic right to speak and to ask questions are deprived.
All right, let's move on to the topic of Hong Kong's judiciary. So, as we know, you yourself are facing some of your own legal woes. Given your legal background, because you obtained a Bachelor of Law degree, some people might criticize you of knowingly breaking the law. How would you respond to that?
The existing law, quite many of them are not just itself. Looking at the public security law, look at the rioting charge, and people so easily fall into it. So many young protesters go to jail unfairly because of that. So I think the laws, quite many are obsolete and need to be changed, and quite many are infringing our human rights. So even the rule of procedures in Leshko, it's part of the law, are amended, altered, so very unfairly, favoring only the establishment.
Right. So earlier,
our rights.
So earlier this year, you launched some private prosecutions. One is against a policeman for shooting at protesters in Saiwan Hall, and another one's against a taxi driver plowing into protesters in Sham Shui Po. Well, so Justice Secretary Teresa Chen intervened in both cases. Well, by the time you said the decision made by Teresa Chen overrides the rule of law. But according to Basic Law Article 63, it grants the DOJ ultimate control over criminal prosecution and thus give the Justice Secretary wide powers of intervention. Will you follow the basic law, or is it not perfect?
I think that's not the right way to interpret the basic law, according to my legal team. Of course, under the basic law, the prosecution power lays in the DOJ. But of course, the basic law also says that Hong Kong runs the British common law that's inherited. Under the British common law, private prosecution can be launched by every citizen. So I'm a citizen. I have the right to launch a private prosecution. Why don't we go back to the questions? Why the DOJ have to intervene and drop the case? They said that my evidence is not sufficient, but if that's the case, I will lose anyway in an open court. Not to mention that the magistrate in the first place has granted the summons to leave saying that the prima facie evidence on the face is enough for me to go on.
Right, that brings us to the last question of this part about judicial independence of Hong Kong. So what would you say about people targeting judges in the courts over disagreements of rulings? Do you think that they should be condemned for harming the rule of law as well?
People criticizing judges' decisions is okay as long as they are based on the facts, but not their own political views. So I think in an open society, we should accept criticism, but not to the extent like the pro-establishment newspaper critics naming the judges to be yellow judges, to be pro-democracy, and they should be punished. And I think that goes way beyond the line, and that goes against the rules.
Right.
A very clear line of what we can do to not go over the line of convening or going against the rule of law.
Right. So the Justice Secretary actually denounced the attacks against these so-called yellow judges. But last November, fires were started outside the Sha Tin Magistrates Court after following rulings that were seen against biased against protesters. Do you think that's a right way to pursue the rule of law, or do you think they should be condemned as well?
No, not at all. That's not the right way of protesting or expressing a political view by setting up fire outside the court. I would never agree of such a way of doing things. But I think people should be free to criticize any judgment that they don't agree with. For example, on social media and talk to the press. I think it's absolutely okay. But then to name the judges and to attack them personally, to defame them, these are not acceptable to me.
All right, that seems like a good place to take a short break. We'll be right back. Stay with us.